This episode brought to you by Peter Wood's Museum of the Impossible.
What's a Museum of the Impossible? It's gonna be like Harry Potter meets Ripley's Believe It or Not. It'll be a one-of-a-kind, themed, interactive space where people can experience the impossible. But I need your help. To get the project started, I've set up a Patreon over at museumoftheimpossible.com. If you're able to throw a few bucks my way each month, we can build it together. Thanks for your support, and I can't wait to welcome you into the Museum of the Impossible.
Welcome to the podcast of the impossible. I'm Peter Wood, and on today's episode, I'm joined by a sleight of hand master, playing card aficionado, and all-around snappy dresser. That's right, I'm delighted to welcome back to the podcast, Mr. Timothy Carver. It's been, we want to make sure today that we put on the exact same clothing that we were wearing the last time you came to visit.
Consistent.
Yeah, because it's clearly, obviously, time has passed. So I've talked to a couple other folks on the podcast about this, but I know you've got a certain take on it, and that is sort of the mentorship and teacher roles in magic. And I think in particular, what I'm interested in your perspective on is that you are the youngest person I know who advocates for mentorship and like one-on-one teaching. And so you are doing your generation a great service by not doing the obvious. Like I said, I'm older such that I'm sort of 1 foot in the book world, 1 foot in the online world, but I know a lot of your peers are like completely in the online world. So I guess, how did you, talk first about, like, we talked in the last episode about sort of getting in through Garrett Thomas into this whole other like deeper world. Is that where sort of your mentorship interest began, or was it upstream of that?
I think it was upstream.
Okay.
It was definitely influenced because of my father.
Okay.
He is a big self-help educator, always been advocating for self-education.
Cool.
If you don't know it, you can find somebody who does and then find the way to get their time. And for those instances where you can't afford their time, buy the books that they sell, watch the DVDs, get the podcasts, learn any available content that these people produce or might be a part of, and study from that point forward. And now with access to the internet, just about everybody's a content creator at some capacity or has to promote something.
Sure.
And so having free access to this sort of content, unbelievably valuable, but you have to seek it out. It's not the sort of thing that's handed to you on a silver platter.
Right.
And you really do have to be diligent at it. And I didn't know that you weren't, quote unquote, allowed to reach out to these people and say, hey, I'm having difficulty with this move, or I was looking for more clarification on something you mentioned in the DVD or the book.
Right.
I'm not following. Can you elaborate? And 9.5 times out of 10, these people are kind enough to respond to the emails, the text message, whatever it might be. I count myself extremely fortunate because I like to say that I got to meet all of my heroes and they all turned out to be amazing people.
That's great.
A lot of people say don't meet your heroes, but in magic, for myself, I count myself extremely lucky.
Yeah.
It's a rare thing where you get to meet in person all of your magic influences. Yeah, all of your magic influences.
That's crazy, yeah.
And they're all genuine, kind, sincere people who are generous and patient. It's a really amazing community because of that. I think that's one of the reasons why I advocate, is because I'm biased. I know people who met their idols and they didn't turn out to be the best people.
Sure.
And that really soured their experience for magic. And I hate to think that was the reason that they stopped practicing or that they stopped working on something that they originally loved.
Right.
It's a really important thing to try and advocate for the good side of that and how to do it.
Right. Well, and what makes you think, I mean, I think one of the elements, though, is that you need to be such a diligent student of their work to begin with to be worthy of their time.
Absolutely.
And as we talked about last time, if you're sort of asking a question that's already on the surface anyway, then it's a waste. So I guess, I mean, part of it probably advocating for mentorship is also advocating for just finding an artist whose work you love so much that you just do a serious deep dive into it, you know? Have you ever found somebody who you liked their work and you read their material and then you felt like you knew enough, like where you didn't have to reach out to them for any follow-up, or is there always more?
I think there's always more, but it
Okay.
depends on what you're trying to get out of the content.
Right.
So I've definitely studied other magicians, not nearly as deeply, but I wanted to know one specific trick well enough to be able to perform it, but
Right.
it's not a trick that I had an attachment to where like I have to know every aspect of the iterations of this.
Okay.
It happens most often with sleight of hand artists who put out like a single move.
Okay.
Tony Chang and Ricky Smith come to mind, these masters of sleight of hand
Yeah.
who have very concise, exact style, and all of their teaching covers exactly everything you need to know.
Okay.
And by and large, you don't need to go further than just watching the video again.
Right. Right. So you're not, yeah, well, that's, I mean, sort of the gray area that I'm trying to poke at is like, I have we'll use Jay Sankey as another example, where I have watched a video of his or purchased an effect or read something in one of his books, and I love it and I understand it and I put it into my show and everything's going great with it. I shouldn't reach out to him to bother him.
Sure.
I mean, I can text him, or, you know, I can email him and say, this was great, I loved it. You know, like I can be complimentary, but you know, but at the same time though, you also like, you don't want to have to reach out to somebody because they did a poor job of explaining it, you
Right.
know?
And that's happened too.
Sure.
I've had people who are extremely good at sleight of hand
Yeah.
put out a tutorial on a very intricate routine,
Uh-huh.
and I can't make heads or tails of it.
Right. Yeah.
I still can't, but I'm not going to, send him an email and say, I'm not following this because you're a bad teacher.
Sure.
And I'm
Yeah.
not going to name that person either.
Yeah.
It would be a bad first impression.
Right.
So I've always been careful about that, but I agree completely with Jay Sankey. I actually got to meet him
Okay.
for the first time in New York not too long ago. And he is amazing and kind and sweet and generous.
Yeah.
His lecture was fantastic. You could tell he's done it for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
And he was just so polished and put together. As a matter of fact, he was so kind at the end of the lecture. I hung around to, again, be worth his time, waited patiently for everyone else who just wanted to buy the stuff and go.
Yeah.
I waited to the back of the room, and he was like, "Are you waiting for something?" I said, "I actually wanted to take a moment and thank you for your influence on my magic career, because it was some of the first videos I ever learned on
Sure.
card tricks were Jay Sankey."
Uh-huh.
And he was like, "Oh, that's so sweet. Were you looking to grab anything off this?"
Okay.
And I said, "Actually, I have most of it." He said, "Well, you
Yeah.
could use some extras." And he throws everything off his lecture table and says, "Take this.
Aw.
You're a cool guy."
Oh, that's awesome.
And he was just the sweetest person.
Yeah.
Again, I count myself very lucky to have met my magic heroes, and
Sure.
they're generous and kind and sweet. It's just,
Yeah.
it's something I'm very grateful for.
Do you, my biggest concern with mentorship is I have many anecdotal examples that I've seen where somebody is a bad copy of the original. And I think that I blame both the mentor and the mentee. Like they kind of both need to have the thought of, how can I have this knowledge, how can I impart this knowledge to this person, but also free them to make it their own, as opposed to just, here's how I do it. Do you think there's a sort of a secret to that, or like, how do you avoid being a Garrett Thomas clone? You know,
I'd be very proud to be a Garrett Thomas clone, if only because
you're not wearing black, so you're already failing.
that's true. You're absolutely right about that. But I think that the secret to not being a carbon copy is down to having a candid conversation with your mentor, or the mentor having one with you, and saying, asking what do you want to get out of this, essentially. Because if you only intend to learn the trick to the best of your abilities and then do it to the best of your abilities, and you're totally fine using their lines, their patter, their jokes, whatever, and all the moves beat for beat, that's only going to teach you a rehearsal. That won't teach you context, right?
Okay,
So
right.
performance is a combination of preparation and adaptation, kind of improvisation.
Okay.
And my teachers often explain that these aren't rules, they're guidelines.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
And so they'll clarify something with a context and say, by the way, this only happens so many times out of 100, so you probably won't need this advice, but if it does come up, do this instead. And with that, over time, I think those incremental permissions to improvise allow you to realize, oh, it's not set in stone. You can make it as you go and kind of put a little bit more personality. A lot of people advocate for, oh, make it your own, make it your own.
Right.
There's some really valuable education in doing it exactly the way the book writes.
Yeah.
To get it down, to understand the beats, to understand the thought process, especially when it comes to DVDs, because DVDs or downloads, digital video content, often doesn't have enough time or bandwidth to teach all the minutia that a book might teach.
Right. Right.
And so for the tricks, like Garrett Thomas doesn't have any publications in written format aside from lecture notes.
Okay.
And those lecture notes, which is a tiny little pamphlet, has more detail packed into it for these tricks because you could get more detail out of the words than you can at the DVDs. And it's a really interesting way to filter and learn those kind of combinations of.
Right.
I think there's just a balance between what you want to get out of it and how you want to be remembered, right? Because you don't want to be remembered as, well, we saw this guy and he was doing these tricks, but I don't quite understand why, right? Because that usually happens when you're a carbon copy. It feels like a disconnect.
Right.
You want to be a real person.
Sure.
And I think one good solution to do this is a magician from the UK, Ben Earl. He teaches sleight of hand and a lot of his tricks as what I'd consider to be more neutral magic. So he doesn't teach a single presentation for things.
Oh, cool.
He does a trick where he says, now you could put this in the category of sleight of hand. You could also talk about extreme skill. He puts magic in categories the same way Garrett Thomas does when he talks about organizing magic, which is by topic. So if somebody brings up Penn and Teller Fool Us, you'd have tricks that are kind of labeled in your head or actually on a list in my case of things that were on Penn and Teller Fool Us that fit in Penn and Teller Fool Us, things that you would submit to, like you could put them in these categories, but those same tricks could also be under a category of sleight of hand. You're like, what's the last thing you practiced in sleight of hand that was really difficult?
Right.
Or is the hand really quicker than the eye? It's subjects that a audience would bring up to you.
Okay.
And then you could do tricks to react to their request, right? But those might be the same trick. Like 3-card Monty could be filed under gambling, could be filed under sleight of hand, could be filed under games and puzzles.
Right.
All three of those categories could be the exact same trick, but it would mean that you're not doing a carbon copy reproduction of the same routine over and over and over, because it feels organic that they brought up the subject and you responded.
Yeah, it's almost, I mean, it reminds me of just like anecdotes. Like I have little mini stories that I can tell that share something about my life and my experience, but also they're normally triggered by something that someone else is chatting about, And so it's interesting to think about that in terms of magic where, and especially as you're saying, like you kind of want the magic to open a little window into your soul. Like that's just like a story about, sometime when I was driving to blah, 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 would. So it's interesting to sort of know. And I think, that also makes sense of talking about, avoiding the carbon copy. If it isn't personal to you, or if it doesn't apply, then that will help you to not be a carbon copy of the person it comes from.
My favorite example of that is of Teller when he was doing this story, but when he was doing a Boy Scouts show, one of his first public shows, he had given out candy to get everybody into a good mood, and he starts his show by dressing like a Chinese magician,
right?
And he's 10 years old.
Sure.
And he comes out acting as if he just traveled back in time and doesn't know where he is. And he's starting to do this, magic act.
Yeah.
And he's clearly a 10-year-old from Philadelphia
Sure.
pretending to be someone he isn't.
Right.
And the audience rebelled by throwing hard candy that he had given them at him.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And so he learned very quickly not to put up a facade, not to fake your way into magic, because you can't get away with it. People would detect that and dislike it very quickly.
However, I believe that story must be apocryphal because I have never seen a kid get rid of a piece of candy.
Yeah.
How bad could he have? Can of tomatoes? Sure, chuck it up on stage.
Right.
But if he gave the kids candy, maybe the wrappers, I don't know.
He did say that he had been pelted, so I think, again, it's hard candy, so not like chocolate. It's not like good quality candy.
Okay, so it's probably like we hate you and we hate your cheap candy that you gave us.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Yeah. I'm fine with that now.
Gumballs.
My apologies to Teller. I take it all back. It's probably true.
Yeah.
I think sort of knowing when and I think that also is like when you are meeting, talking with a mentor. And I think something else that's important here, just before you don't have one mentor. And I think that is part of the smart way to go about this. And like, I never had one mentor. I had a variety of people who I would reach out to who, like you say, like I have plenty of great experiences where I reached out to somebody because I had their book or their video and I wanted more information. And again, 98% of the time get a lovely response back. And that's such a thrill. But also even just local guy. I mean, we've talked about Jeff and other people who we meet through the magic shop. So yeah, I think it's important to have that variety of effect on your career because the negative examples of mentorship that I can think of are people who just adopted this other person's persona and thinking as completely as they could, not 100% because they're not the same person. And then it just ends up being really weird of course, the easiest example is how many David Copperfield or David Blaine or Chris Angel lookalikes have there been over the years?
Right.
Just completely, I love this, I'm just going to completely do it. And it never makes as much sense as the original artist.
Of course. There was a thing that I think is interesting to point out, which is there aren't a lot of copycats of Penn and Teller.
Yeah.
Because
That's
they're
true.
a duo act, so it's hard to convince another person to like it as much as you do.
Sure.
So probably, Blaine and Copperfield are easier to imitate because it's a one-man band from the outside.
Sure.
But one thing that Penn often talks about, I'm an avid listener to all of his content, his audiobooks, his podcast. He's amazing. And one of the things he often talks about is the obsession people get over a single subject in art of any kind. And the story he uses is his art student studies Picasso, just like diligently.
Yeah.
And his teacher says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to paint this Picasso. I'll give you access to it. It's in our museum at the college. And you'll paint this until it's perfect. And the differences between your painting and the actual one is where you need to focus.
Right.
Right? Because there's no such thing as an actual carbon copy because you're not the same person.
Sure.
And so focusing in on those differences, then realizing, okay, so those are where my personality can't help but shine through.
Right.
And then asking yourself, are those things I want to show the audience? And then if yes, put more focus on that. That's how my mentors have taught me, because I'm very grateful to local magicians from Jeff Eline, Brian Curry, Howard Katz, Kenny Kaplan, Dave Thoman, very, very kind, generous people who taught me unbelievably valuable lessons in magic. And then the people who taught me the sleight of hand technique from Ben Earl, Garrett Thomas, fortunately enough, I can also say Teller. Unbelievable people who were kind and patient enough to give me advice and to answer my questions when I emailed them or talked to them.
Sure.
It's very valuable to have more than one perspective and to not follow 100% of everything. I do have a tendency of putting Garrett and Ben and Teller on pedestals as if they're the gods in their field, which I'm not wrong to do because they are the top of the top.
I think that's fair. Yep.
They're some of the best.
Sure.
And so I put a lot of emphasis on their education, their teaching, because they've
Yeah.
done it more than I have. They've put more time and effort into it than I have, and I just want to basically be, like I've said before, be worth it, right? If they're going to put any amount of time to me, I want them to see the investment they put in me and know that they got a return on it, if only in the satisfaction knowing that I listened and paid attention to what they gave.
That's totally fair. And yeah, I you know, you and I have been hanging out in the magic shop sometimes where someone will come in and they will ask me a question, and oftentimes it'll be a question, I mean, like a business, how do I make money doing this kind of a question.
Yep.
And I'm giving them my advice and ideas, and I can just see that they aren't really paying attention, and they're just sort of like, and it's like, what do we do? Like, I'm literally giving you information that helps me to have a career doing this, and it just feels like I'm wasting my time because you're acting like it's wasting your time. But like, you asked, like, so
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah.
so yeah, having that sort of understanding where meeting the person at the right level, you know,
Right. Learning to listen actively and really pay attention.
Sure.
And that's a thing that magicians, I find them doing all the time, is they're waiting for their turn to speak and not listen.
yeah.
And it's this thing, I'm forgetting where I heard it, but it's a joke from a college professor. He says, my job is to get the information from a textbook onto the essay that I'm requesting from you without it passing between either of our brains.
Oh, cool.
Because
Interesting.
there are people who will say, clearly neither of us need to do this, but it's mandatory.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's this sort of project to get information from me to you. But as a magician, it has to exist in the audience brain, and it has to be consumed in your brain too.
Yep.
If only in the practice stage. I think when you're in performance, you should be present and not focusing on what your techniques are and things. You have practiced enough that you don't need to worry about what your next line is.
Right.
But you should definitely have an understanding of every beat. It's a Groundhog Day, an analogy we both use for magic all the time. I've rehearsed this. I've been in this exact same moment so many times.
Yeah.
The only difference is the person I'm performing for now.
Right.
And
right.
that's going to be the catalyst, the distinction.
Yeah. Yeah. And giving them being, you want to do them the service of the illusion of the first time.
Absolutely.
But then you also want to reward them with the fact that like you have been here and done this before with other situations. And so like, that's why you have the microphone or are performing the trick, or because like, well, I know what I'm doing here. Like I've prepared and practiced and you have it. So trust me. Yeah, no, I think that's all great. And I have one other mentorship question, because you've talked about how you and your mentor, your teachers will talk about where you are and where you want to go. How do you know where you want to go? Like,
that's a question you have to ask yourself a lot.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's not a single set goal. Because when I was a kid, I thought, I'm definitely going to do this professionally. I'm definitely going to be full time.
Okay.
I want to be, a Dave Thoman, a Peter Wood, the guy who does it 24/7. That is his day job.
Sure.
There's something romanticized and amazing about living the life of a magician.
Sure.
And then you realize that also includes doing children's birthday parties and balloon gigs.
Sure. Yeah.
And the things that I never had any interest in doing.
Yeah.
And so I had to take a very hard look at things and said, okay, do I want to push to make this a career, but at the cost of doing things that I sincerely don't enjoy doing? Because I'm very particular about the kind of magic that I want to perform. I'm very particular about the moments I want to share with people, which are often close up, intimate, and intellectual. I'm a student of magic, and that comes across in everything I perform. And that is a very tailored audience to want to watch that, because most people just want entertainment, and I might be elitist here, but I don't have any interest in being an entertaining magician. I want to be someone so unique and individual that it's captivating. It's completely, an amazing unique experience, not just an entertaining show that is fun for the whole family kind of generalization.
Sure.
You can make a whole career off of doing that because obviously it's a bigger audience.
Sure.
But I had to be honest with myself when I was a teenager, thinking, okay, do I want to go to college and set up for a job, or do I want to just start working or just start magic? And a lot of these decisions had to be made. And so I took my first job working at Target, which I know you had a spell at Target yourself.
Yep.
Were you giving me advice on that when I started?
Sure.
And I started from there and just kept going from one day job to another and practicing magic on the side.
Yeah.
I think that changed when I started doing magic lessons during the pandemic, because I realized this is an avenue that I've put a lot of effort into. I take a lot of pride and care in my ability to communicate and teach, get my thoughts from my head into yours as I would in a performance, but you can use those same skills to teach someone the secrets, provided that they work, right? Provided that they put in the same effort, because again, I'm diligent and militant about practicing and about dedicating time to an art form that I love. And if my students don't put in the same effort, I don't want to be spending time doing that, because I don't want to just they could just watch YouTube to learn the same thing at a much lower quality rate.
Sure.
Because obviously one-on-one education is, especially in magic, the best form of education you can get.
Right. Yep. No, I think that makes sense. And it's cool that I suppose like part of knowing where you want to go is surrounding yourself by other people and seeing other paths that others have taken. Completely. And then sort of trying to cafeteria pick, like, okay, I would love to do something like that. I definitely don't want to be doing something like that. Maybe. So now you're sort of that's what's helping you to pick a lane. Completely. And you're able to do that more easily. Like I know guys who have chosen a lane by swerving between all the possible lanes, and eventually they pick one. I think it's a lot smarter if you're able to look at how other people are doing in their lanes and try to put yourself in their shoes and decide if that's what you want to be doing or not, and then course correct as needed,
Exactly.
And
that's where you need mentorship and outside perspective to say, are you sure that this job, this gig, whatever it is putting you in the right direction?
Right.
Because there are instances where if I took a kid's birthday party, I might get booked for another 15 of those. And then I'm stuck doing that for a while. Right. Is that a skill set that I want to hone? Rather than, taking on more students, for example, and getting better at teaching. Right. That sort of thing. To get different skill sets, but which one do you want to focus on? Yep.
No, that makes sense. Well, and I have to say, for our friend listening, if they're curious to sort of see some of the stuff that you're up to, or, if when you are when you do have a public performance, or maybe even, sharing something from a student or whatever, the Instagram handle is Timothy Loves Magic. So they can go ahead and check that out. And I'm sure they can also, if, there will probably in the future be ways people can Google you and find you and other things. So you're always, you are as accessible as the mentors that you speak so highly of. So
I do try and be. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was a fun chat, and I appreciate it. And thank you to our friend listening in. But that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast of The Impossible. For behind the scenes access to my Museum of the Impossible project, as well as info about my public shows and private events and social media, you can head on over to peterwood.com. I'm Peter Wood. Thanks.